working with the replacement for Jill. I told her today she wasn't really a replacement for her. She was our founding pastor, and we're not going to replace her. This is just someone to lead us to this second chapter, that she'll always be a part of us, and that is absolutely true. So we've been working a lot with that. I also want to report that we did hire Tori Brown for the Director of Youth. We had a great search committee that helped find her. She's a wonderful young lady and very energetic and doing a great job, and so we're glad to have her there. One of the concerns that I had reported the last time we talked was some concerns we had with some systems to make sure that everything was kind of in order, and we're taking a look at the school and SHEP about that. That is a great program, and one that we really want to make sure that we have all the protections in place for us and for our teachers and administrators and for those families. And so we are taking a look at some of that. We have contacted a consultant who's going to come in a few weeks to kind of help us review some of those things, and so we can begin to put some practices in place that will make sure that we're in good order there. So we are very excited about the things that can happen here with SHEP, and so we'll be looking at other things as well. The finance committee and us are, we're in cahoots on a few things too. So we'll report on that in a little bit. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, just hold them. We don't accept questions or anything. No, I'm just kidding. If you have any questions or any concerns, please let me know. Thank you.
I'm reporting for Tom Hatfield. He couldn't be here this evening. So the trustees have been meeting, and as you can see, we have still a couple lights out here in this sanctuary. And so we continue to look at different options for upgrading our lighting here in the sanctuary. And so we've got an electrical engineer and people who are much smarter than I am trying to work on that and trying to bring all of those pieces together. So we don't have a bid yet, but we are working on that. And also, many of y'all have been continuing to ask about our soundboard. We had approved to do a new soundboard some time ago, but it's been sitting out, or at least part of it has been sitting out in the Pacific Ocean off of California. And so we've been waiting on that. Was talking with our company a couple weeks ago before Easter, and they said we're going to be able to make that work and get that new soundboard in, but we don't want to do that prior to Easter. They said, pretty sure that your worship pastor would not be pleased with that. And we said, yeah, I wouldn't be pleased with that. So the board and the part that we need are going to be, and we're thinking it could be installed as early as this week, which means our new audio and video team will have one more step closer to getting that done. And again, that's something we've already approved and are ready to move forward on. So those are the big things. No big, massive trustees issues for over at the Source campus. Thankfully, because we're renting that, it's a kind of a different agreement in what we need there. But at this point, that is the trustees' report. And if you have questions, please bug Tom.
I'm Terry Malone. I'm with the Finance Committee, and I'm pleased to report at the end of the year, many of you may have wondered, we ended in a very positive position last year, but much of that was because of our federal monies and recognizing the ongoing challenges that we have in relationship to our SHEP program. There are going to be a lot of moving pieces and associated with that during this year as well. So at the present time, we're finished with our first quarter. Our budget is not in the best of position. We're in a negative, but because of federal monies, we're actually not in a horrible situation. But the point being, we're going to be looking at these pieces and looking at adjustments as we go along. Rick will give a few more details.
Well, we are financially stable mainly due to the federal fund money that we have coming in, and so we are in a good position. My concern is the 2022 budget. As it stands right now, our 2022 budget is $200,000 underwater, meaning that we have more money allocated for expenses than we actually took in last year. So the concerns of the Business Office and Finance Committee is that we're going to take it back and try to get a 20% reduction in some of the program areas to try to see if we can make that $200,000 go away. So we have not officially approved the 2022 budget yet, so hopefully after a few adjustments, we'll be able to get that done. But as for now, we are financially stable and there's nothing really to worry about.
Any questions? Anything at all? Dennis?
I'm Dennis Liptrap, president of the Methodist Men's Group. We've had a reasonable year. We meet on the second Monday of the month for the September through May, and we're going to have our final meeting before we go to the summer break on May the 9th. And I want to announce that Judy Blakeman and Alicia let me find her name here, Dunn, from the Arlington, she's in the Family Resource Coordinator for Arlington School, will be with us on May the 9th to talk about our backpack ministry, long-time backpack ministry with the Arlington Elementary School. So anybody that's interested in learning more about the impact of this type ministry on the families that attend, children attend Arlington, are welcome to come to our meeting. I would just ask, it's a dinner meeting on Monday, May the 9th, and I'd like to know if you're coming so I can have a plate for you. Thank you.
I'm Joyce Tigalar, and president of the UMW. Except for the UMW, United Methodist Women has had a name change. Now we're called United Women in Faith. I think that's right. And it's a name change at the national level, and we're all still kind of adapting and figuring out what's what. But it is part of a refreshment of the entire organization, and it's going to include new programming ideas and helps in that way. And it's to better nurture our members and welcome new people, new women into our sisterhood of love and action. We also, oh, and I didn't bring them up. Would you lift up the note cards? We also have note cards for sale. The artist is Terry Bagby, and Bob Cole they were printed by Bob Cole with Consolidated Graphic Communications. Thank you very much. And they're still available for sale. There are 8 cards for $10, and it's our fundraiser, so the funds will be used for our mission projects. Contact me, contact Circle members, and soon we plan to have them for sale at the reception desk between services. The Southern Hills unit of whatever we are, United Methodist Women or United Women in Faith, we're having a spring fling, and it's going to be a old-fashioned hymnal sing. It will be on May 4th at 5:30. It's going to be a kind of a sort of a potluck dinner, and then we're going to sing some great old hymns in the hymnal and also recognize our senior girls from the church. So it'll be a fun evening of fellowship and great food, so all while praising God. So anyone's welcome to join us, just let us know. Thank you.
I am still kind of walking on clouds from yesterday, so you'll have to excuse me. the GROW team hosted the How Great Her Joy conference yesterday, and I see so many faces that were not only there, but that really helped and made it possible. So I'm so grateful to all of you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We had 120 women and 2 men, Moses and James, and we just had a beautiful day. Or I personally did, and the feedback I'm getting that it was just what we needed. And so I'm just so grateful to everyone that helped. Christina also asked me to share that men, you're next. And I don't know anything about men's conferences or retreats, so we'll just have to work on it together. So that's what I have to report.
I'm Jean Lawrence. I'm chairman of the worship team. I just want to talk a little about what we've been up to. As you know, probably noticed we've been messing with the offering just a little bit. We wanted to move the act of giving offerings and singing the doxology back toward the middle of the service instead of at the end like we'd been trying to do. And initially, there was some hesitancy about restarting passing the plates because of COVID concerns. But we decided to give that a try, and I haven't heard any negative feedback on that. Welcome to hear it if you have it, but I don't have it. I have not heard it. And so I think going forward, we'll keep doing this unless there's another big COVID scare. And we've also been talking about reinstating the early service. We haven't decided to do that yet, but we would like to hear from you if you would be interested in attending a service at 8:45 on Sunday mornings. The service, just like it was before, would be contemplative in nature and would include Holy Communion in every service. And third, I want to mention Music and Arts Camp, because the Children's Music and Arts Camp is scheduled for July 25th through 29th from 9 a.m. to 2 o'clock, all 5 days. And it will be offered for children who have completed kindergarten through 5th grades, and it will include singing, drama, movement and choreography, set and prop design, recreation, and Bible study. And Joan Wooden is still recruiting volunteers to assist, so please contact her if you are willing to help. And if you have questions or concerns or ideas about worship, please feel free to contact me or any member of the worship team.
I'll also be reporting on SHEP. As Maynard said, we're going to be looking into, with this consultant coming in, giving ourselves an opportunity to do some refinement. And part of the reason for that is currently I oversee SHEP, both as steering committee with SPRC and then just my role as senior pastor. And that's too much. Actually, it puts all of us a little bit more at risk than what we want to be doing. And so this consultant is to help us take our steering committee, make ourselves have a little bit more structure and formulation, and also give ourselves some accountability on where we're going. Our classes are full. We have all the kids we're keeping in ratio, and everything is going well there. In fact, our programming is going pretty well. We are still struggling with teachers and trying to keep people consistently in. We get a lot of either sick people, or we'll start to hire somebody and they're there for a couple days and then they're gone. And so we're still trying to work on that. Some of that is just a workforce base. Some of that is COVID still related, and this, all of the money that's out there in other places. But we are very much aware of that and trying to work forward. The summer program is right around the corner, and Ann and the team are very excited about what we've got getting ready to give to our kids for the summer programming, both school-age kids and our regular SHEP students and stuff. So SHEP is very active, let me just tell you. Very active, and it's a beautiful noise that we have here on the church on a regular basis. So that's the Shep report for now.
I have been sitting there trying to figure out if I'm really happy or really sad that this is my last ever of my entire career administrative team meeting. It's a real mixed bag for me. Just a point of personal privilege. It's been such a joy to serve with you leaders in this capacity. And though I am excited about Kenny's and my future, we have done a lot of good ministry together, and we've planned a lot of wonderfulness together. And so I thank you, and I encourage you to keep on keeping on. And men, if you enjoy as much joy as we women did over the weekend, you're in for a blessing. So what I want to report to you is normally this meeting is typically a futuring event, and since my future with Southern Hills is very limited at this point, I can tell you that what I am working on is transition. And so my team and I, my lead team and I, have talked about continuity through the summer as far as fellowship is concerned, and a Wednesday night eventing every couple weeks, so that's going to be going on, and they'll be carrying the ball for that to help Leticia out with that. And I'll be working with the team and Leticia on transition. Leticia is a dear friend of mine. I couldn't be more tickled to leave my congregation in her hands. I couldn't handpick her better. So I am just thrilled for the future of the Source. And just know that I will be working on the smoothest transition, and I've spoken with my lead team about that, about transition, and we are headed into a bright future for the Source. And I thank you for indulging my personal moment, and I love you all.
Mentioned this morning, there I am, at this campus, we're going to have a celebration and a way to say thank you to Jill. That is going to be a joint service for both of our campuses. It's going to be held at Shiloh Park unless there is rain, and we've talked about that as a contingency today, but the plan is to do that at Shiloh Park with all of the church together. And so we'll be able to do that. There are ways in which you can say thank you to Jill. We've got a couple of fun gifts and unique gifts and things that we just want to bless her with. I've told her this, so now I can make this public. For that June 5th gathering, Paige Williams, Jill's bestest buddy in the whole world, is going to be coming and will be preaching that day. And so we're really excited about that. And again, this is going to be open to the whole church. So if you come here at 10:45 on June 5th, you're going to be sadly disappointed. And there will be tacos. We are planning on tacos at that event as well. So, and obviously that's a love language right there for Jill. So all of that is in the plans, and we'll be getting more and more information to you as we get closer to that date. Okay? Cool? Yay! All right. I'm really just going slow. Because I know that what we're here for the rest of this evening tonight is to talk about Methodism and our denomination, and to hear some things that we need to share. And so I'm going to be talking to Liz, and she's going to be advancing some slides, because I figured you might want to see things instead of just my dopey face for the next little bit. And so you ready for those? Hey, there it is. So what are we doing tonight? Well, we're really just talking about facts, okay? I'm not going to take any questions about that. And there's a reason for that, all right? Part of that is because it's important to be all on the same page. And secondly, it's important that when we have conversations about all of the stuff that's coming up, this is all very personal no matter what's going on. These are topics, and these deal with real human beings and real people. And so to sit in a room and to ask a bunch of questions that are not really connected is really kind of disingenuous. And so what the hope and the plan is as we continue to walk forward, we will have opportunities to ask questions of each other, to be in smaller groups where we can remember that we're humans and that we're beloved children of God together as we walk. And so we want to be foster those environments in really helpful ways instead of, hey, let's pepper this question and let's throw this question out and try and keep it a little bit more together. Does that make sense? That's the only question I'm going to ask for you. Give me a response. Okay, good. I'm going to do my very best to do nothing but report, no commentary. I'm very capable at doing commentary on here because this is passionate for me just like it's passionate for you. It's passionate to me as someone who's chosen the United Methodist Church. It's passionate as someone who is as clergy in the United Methodist Church for multiple reasons. But I'm going to do my best to keep from commentary. This is about information. This is not about changing any kind of ideas or opinions or anything like that. I'm just here to give you the facts. This is a Dragnet episode, okay? All right, next slide. I'm going to ask for you to excuse the history. There's no way you can read that, and that's perfectly okay with me, because what that is basically showing you our history of splits and reunifying as a Methodist people. And here's a little history again. For those of you who know this, you can tune out for the next little bit. But Wesley in 1739 formed the first Methodist Society in London. In 1776, we had a little party over here called the Revolutionary War. And when that happened, we kicked out the Anglican Church. Anglican Church is run by who? Do anybody know who the head of the church is? The king. We don't want no king, right? So the Anglican Church was not allowed to be here for a period of time. That meant all of our Methodist churches that had been formed in that time had no clergy. So in 1783, the organization of the Methodist Episcopal Church, in 1784, the Christmas Conference was begun, and at that time period, 2 bishops that were installed by John Wesley in England came over to the United States, and they began the Methodist Episcopal Church. In 1792, the first split. So again, 1783 were founded. In 1792, the first split occurred. And that was around African American leadership in the first quadrennial General Conference. Richard Allen, who went on to later found the Methodist Episcopal Church Zion, left the church at that time. In 1796, the Zion Methodist Episcopal Church was founded, as well as the Evangelical Association. All right, now that group is going to be a matter later on in our history. That is another part of our Methodist story. In 1800, the General Conference issued a letter abolishing slavery and passed legislation allowing African Americans to be ordained in the Methodist Episcopal Church. That's 1800. Please remember that number. In 1815, the United Brethren Church was established, as well as the African Methodist Episcopal Church. From 1815 till 1842, it was kind of quiet. We did have a bunch of camp meetings and those kind of things, but in terms of what it talks about tonight, nothing really affects us. Again, remember, 1800, General Conference passed that letter. It was in 1842 that the Wesleyan Church split from the Methodist Episcopal Church as an abolitionist organization. They were more engaged in making sure that African Americans had leadership. 1844 is when the Methodist Episcopal Church split between North and South. So we went from 1800 to 1844 before that split actually happened. That's important to remember, okay? In 1904, women were given laity rights and were admitted as delegates to General Conference. Woo! 1939, the Methodist Church organized. This was the reunification of the North to South and the Methodist Protestant denominations. So that was a rejoining of several different groups. In 1945, the Evangelical United Brethren Church was organized. This was that evangelical and that united group coming together. In 1968, the United Methodist Church was founded. This is the joining of the Methodist and the Evangelical United coming together. How we got the name United Methodist Church. All right, that quick, next picture. This is our uniting conference, formed on April 23rd, 1968, as a merger of the Evangelical United Methodist and Methodist denominations. Okay? Isn't that pretty? Yay, look at us. Next slide. Again, I'm asking your forgiveness on this, but it's important to remember about who does what and why as we talk about all this stuff, okay? So you got our history, now a little bit of structure. Next slide. We have 3 bodies in the United Methodist Church. In many ways, our structure is set up much like the United States. We have an executive branch, we have a judicial branch, and we have a legislative branch. All right, the first top there on the slide there is the conference. In the conference, we have three different designations. We have the General Conference. We'll get to that in a second. We have the jurisdictional and the central conferences. These are smaller groups of the Methodist Church. So, for instance, we are a part in Kentucky of the Southeast Jurisdiction. Basically, think the SEC in college sports. That's where we are. Then we have annual conference. We are part of the Kentucky Annual Conference. All right? We have a bishop in the Kentucky Annual Conference. That is our area. All right? From the annual conference, the last area, it's not on this list, but it's also part of the charge, is the local charge. We had a charge conference. We are the Southern Hills United Methodist Church Charge, a part of the Kentucky Annual Conference, members of the Southeast Jurisdiction, members of the General Conference of the United Methodist Church. Got it? That's our conference section. You'll notice there's the most major decisions are made by conference. The Episcopal, our executive branch, these are bishops that oversee churches and pastors in the annual conference. They meet collectively in their annual council of bishops. Bishops currently are appointed for life. So that means our retired bishops are still part of the council of bishops and how they make those decisions. All right? Their primary responsibilities and powers are about appointing clergy and providing leadership to annual conferences. Now, that's not always been true. Bishops have had more power since from 1968, and quite frankly, it's waned. That power has been taken away from bishops over that time. Sometimes appropriately, sometimes not. Again, that's commentary, just giving you the facts. They've had more power, they have less now. The last group is the Judicial Council. This is our Supreme Court in many ways. Their primary purpose of the Judicial Council is to make sure that rulings and the constitutionality of decisions that happen at General Conference are real. All right? They hold the law. They're towing the line. Okay? And what they're really going to be towing is they're going to be towing our book of discipline, our book of worship, and our book of resolutions. Not as much the book of worship, but particularly those other two. They make sure that all of those things fit with inside of the Constitution, our founding documents as United Methodist. Okay? Got it? Again, I know it's history, it's kind of drag. Next slide. But it's important, huh? I know. The General Conference, this is the highest legislative body in the United Methodist Church. It normally meets every 4 years, and it is the only body that can speak for the entire denomination. So when you hear USA Today or CNN or Fox News saying the United Methodist Church today voted to do this, and there wasn't a general conference, you can immediately go, not true. That's a flat lie, because none of those decisions occur without the general conference meeting. They cannot say that the Methodist Church has decided on something without the general conference meeting. And even then, if General Conference approves something, that's got to go to the Judicial Council to be approved or struck down as unconstitutional or whatever else. Right? That is the body that meets and that does what it needs to do. Right? Again, normally they meet every 4 years. We have been living in a weird time. Okay? Next slide. 1972 and the 50-year challenge. This is where we are tonight. In 1972 was the first opportunity for legislation to be brought regarding homosexuality before the church. 1972. Remember what I talked about, 1800 and 1844? It's a long time in there between amongst when the church as a big tent has continued to work together. But in 1972, there was a lot of things happening within our country. Go to the next slide, please. There's a changing attitude, quite frankly. The American Psychiatric Association removed sexuality from the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Illness in 1973. Prior to that, homosexuality was a mental illness. A few UMC churches, such as Glide Memorial San Francisco, began a new gay liberation movement. And so at that time, to the General Conference, legislation was brought talking about homosexuality within the church and what our status was going to be. Go to the next page. 1972, this language was adopted, and I'm going to read it. Homosexuals, no less than heterosexuals, are persons of sacred worth who need the ministry and guidance of the church in their struggle for human fulfillment as well as the spiritual and emotional care of a fellowship which enables reconciling relationships with God, with others, and with self. Further, we insist that all persons are entitled to have their human and civil rights ensured, although we do not condone the practice of homosexuality and consider this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. That has been in our discipline since 1972. Right? That language. That is the language that continues to come up and continues to be challenged. Next slide. This is from the 2016 United Methodist Book of Discipline. We affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. All persons need the ministry of the church in their struggle for human fulfillment, as well as their spiritual and emotional care of a fellowship that enables reconciling relationships with God, with others, and with self. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. We affirm that God's grace is available to all. We will seek to live together in Christian community, welcoming, forgiving, and loving one another as Christ has loved and accepted us. We implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to be a ministry for and with all persons. Do you see any changes that have happened between 1972 and 2016? And there's a few, right? But the majority of what was said in 72 has still stayed true for the United Methodist Church since that time. Next slide. This is the overview from the Book of Discipline. Oh, go to the next one. Overview of the Book of Discipline. I might have social principles. Nope. Some of those are just the votes over the course of the year. Again, some of that language has been changed over the years, and or not changed, but has been come up for vote repeatedly in these 50 years. Over that time period, the language has not changed. Routinely, for 50 years, the vote has been to stay with that, what we're now going to call traditional or orthodox view of sexuality. Okay? It's been defeated every year since I've been a United Methodist. All right? The overview of the Book of Discipline says this: all are created in God's image and invited into membership in the United Methodist Church. All means all, right? Equal legal rights should be given regardless of sexual orientation. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Self-avowed practicing homosexuals cannot be appointed or ordained for ministry. Same-sex weddings cannot be performed in UMC churches or by UMC clergy, and no UMC funds are to be used to support gay caucuses or groups or promote acceptance of homosexuality or violate the commitment of the UMC not to reject or condemn lesbian, gay members and friends. Okay? So that is what the United Methodist Church Book of Discipline says right now about the current state of where we are. That's the overview. All right? Got it? You can start to see why some of this is getting cloudy for us as a church. Slide every 4 years is the next one. Every 4 years since 1972, the language has been brought up for change and has been sought. It has stayed the same. Oftentimes, the votes have been about 66% to stay the same, to 40 whatever percent to change over the years. Okay. It has been suggested that a growing tolerance or advocacy has occurred, but the 1972 language is clear on how we treat one another. There may have been did you notice the difference? We don't condone the practice of homosexuality. It's not that we reject homosexuals, which some of our brothers and sisters in other denominations have chosen to do. Our language has been clear since 1972. All are welcome. We just reject the practice of homosexuality as incompatible with Christian teaching. Do you see that designation? Okay. But, next slide, since all of these votes continue to happen, we have had things happening within the church where pastors, like in 1997, performed same-sex weddings. And some annual conferences in that time, even with the Book of Discipline saying what it says, have been ordaining, licensing, and commissioning gay clergy. The Florida conference and the upcoming annual conference, in their upcoming annual conference, will be commissioning, which is what Leticia will be doing in a couple weeks as well, commissioning an openly gay practicing male as a clergy member. At that same time, in 2016, the Western jurisdiction, remember we're in the Southeast, the Western jurisdiction is basically all the west of the United States. It's a huge landmass area and a very small church area. But in 2016, they elected to the episcopacy Karen Elavito, who is an openly gay and in a relationship woman, as their bishop. There have been, as soon as she was elected, people in another jurisdiction brought up charges because it's against our discipline. And everything there has been held to abeyance, which means we've all put the pause button on what we're going to do. Her status has been ruled unconstitutional and against the discipline, but we're not doing anything until we've made a decision from the General Conference on how to move forward in sexuality. All of these things here, whether we like them or not, are a current break of our discipline. Again, here is where some of our challenges come. Next slide, a shift in several directions. These are more votes that I thought you would find pretty boring, so keep going. Go to the one where there's the map of the United States, Liz, sorry. In the United States, we've seen a shift. We're increasingly progressive stance toward all areas of sexuality in the United States, and yet there's a decreasing witness in the United States. Continued wealth holdings and rapidly emptying leadership funds within the United States as well. For instance, did you know that our bishops, that now Bishop Leonard Fairley oversees 3 annual conferences? Bishop Davis oversaw 2. Kentucky Annual Conference and the Redbird Missionary Conference. Bishop Fairley also sees the North Carolina Conference. So he's here 1 month, and then the next month he goes to North Carolina, and then he alternates back and forth. And part of the reason for that is we had bishops who retired, but we do not have money in the Episcopal Fund to elect new bishops and put those leaders in position. As I said, we have a decreasing church witness in America, and a decreasing amount of money in order to be able to do some of that. Now, some of that reason, again, I'm not trying to provide commentary, but some of the resources or the finances of the United Methodist Church for Episcopal funds have been used much like Social Security has in our country, where we borrowed a little bit from here and borrowed a little bit from here and borrowed a little to use to do that, and now we're out of money in the Episcopal funds. Many of our local churches are doing just fine, but the Episcopal fund of the Methodist Church is in another setting completely and totally. So we have this shift in the United States, big things changing. Big things changing with how we view sexuality, how we view identity, but also a decreasing witness of the gospel. Next one. There is, on the other side, a growing international presence in the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church in Africa and in Asia and in Central Europe is growing like crazy. UMC has seen substantial growth in these parts of the area. All of those areas are decidedly traditional in their approach to sexuality. There are a few outliers, but when it comes to the percentage-wise, it's more like 90% traditional than anything else. Now, why does that matter? Next slide. Because in 2016, in our regions, the United States had 58.3% of the vote, whereas Africa had 30. Do you see what's changing in 4 years? The African church has grown so much that their delegation has gone up, and the United States delegation has gone down. The Philippines has gone up, not by much, but it means more delegates. Europe stayed the same. Our concordant churches, which is our kind of relational pieces that we have, has gone up a little bit. But the biggest thing that you can notice is that in Africa and in the Philippines or in Asia, those numbers are going up. What does that mean? Well, if you're a traditionalist, that means your chances of staying traditional in the United Methodist Church are going way up. Because our progressive vote is predominantly in the United States. Does that make sense? All right. 2016 General Conference, May 10th through 20th. Many of you all probably remember this. Delegates voted at a very small margin, 428 to 405, to allow our bishops, which is a big deal, to put together a special commission to examine possible recommendations to the Book of Discipline regarding our human sexuality. Next slide. That is going to be the commission on the way forward. All right, these are the members of the commission on the way forward, and they began meeting, and they were to report in 2019 their findings. It focused on 3 models, the commission on the way forward: a traditional plan, a connectional plan, and a one church plan. I'm not going to get into all of those, but all 3 of them offered new ways to go forward. All 3 models were voted on at the special session of General Conference in 2019. At that special conference, next slide, 438 to 384, the traditional plan was passed. It's a simple majority. And so once again, you see, now that margin is slimmer, right? It's getting smaller in terms of where we are, but it is still the majority of a traditional Orthodox understanding of sexuality was passed to move forward. Nod, got it awake? At that time, next slide, Bishop Scott Jones, who was presiding, said this decision is consistent with our denomination's historic stance on human sexuality. I pray we as a denomination can now move forward, working with each other in the spirit of Christian love and joining together as one. We are stronger together in serving God's mission as a diverse body of Christ. That was his hope. Since 2019, that has not been true. The divide over sexuality has only increased. The abeyance that we've put forward against charges against people who are different from us and everything else is different. And so there's been more hurt, more barbs thrown both ways across all of the divides and everything. It's not going away. I want to show you a quote from one of the leaders of the United Methodist Church. This is Reverend Adam Hamilton, and I'm using his as a quote because many of us have used a Reverend Adam Hamilton resource in some school class or whatever. Adam said this at the end of that 2019. The coalition that leaders of the WCA, which is the traditional caucus, more or less, of the church, put together hurt once more our LGBTQ members, their family and friends. They have harmed United Methodist Witness in America. They will negatively impact our mission work in the world. They have significantly impacted our ministry with young adults and the generation that follow. I will not treat my gay and lesbian people as second class. I will not quietly accept the way backwards as an acceptable way for us to live together as United Methodist. So Bishop Scott says, I hope this helps us go forward. Adam Hamilton, very prolific in the United Methodist Church circles, said, I'm not going to allow this. This, and that's not to criminalize one or the other, but this actually shows us where we are in our denomination. For some, to do no harm, we'll say, you got to move forward, it's time. We need to open the doors and accept and do marriages and do all that kind of stuff. For others, it's the exact opposite. That is doing harm. Next one, some criticisms of the traditional camp. These are things that I have heard. So if those who are traditionalists, or maybe some of them call them Orthodox theologians, they will say this. Bishops this is their criticisms from that camp upon the progressives. Bishops have not enforced rules about homosexuality consistently, nor have the historic doctrines been upheld. And they're upset about that. Progressive actions, deliberately breaking rules in the discipline, protesting during general conference, they're disrespectful and show disregard for our polity and covenants. And then last, we reject the statements that they are biased against LGBT people, but simply want to interpret Scripture and hold historic Orthodox views of sexuality and marriage. What does that mean? That last one means basically when a traditionalist say, I can't do a wedding or I won't ordain a gay person, it doesn't mean that I hate gay people, which is often what is said. It's not that I don't hate them. Many of our traditional pastors have gay family members, and this is a very hard thing for them. They've made their decision different than how they feel. All right, let's go to the criticisms from the progressive camp. What they would say against the traditionalists is that these are unjust rules and laws that should not be followed, and that conservative caucuses have worked together to stir up discord and manipulate the global south, the southeast jurisdiction, and through actions like the African Initiative, so stirring the part in our traditional brothers and sisters in Africa. We take Scripture, progressives will say we take Scripture seriously as well, and the call to do no harm includes how we harm those with differing sexual ethics or orientations. Okay, so it's not often what I hear as well from the progressive side, well, you guys just don't think that we like the Bible. Well, most progressives that I know would say, no, we still love the Scriptures, and we still stand on Scriptures as our authority. The difference is not always an authority of Scripture. Sometimes it's how we interpret that Scripture. It's the big theological word is hermeneutic. All right? We can both many of us would look at all kinds of Scriptures very differently, right? And that's what's being said about sexuality as well. Next slide should be, nope. It should say the know that I am God icon. This is what happens when you change your own slides and your notes, but don't change them on the presentation. 2020, May 15th of 2020 was when we were supposed to have our United Methodist General Conference to deal with the fallout of the Special Called Commission on the Way Forward. Guess what happened? COVID. All right, it got postponed. That was supposed to have been pushed until 2022. Guess what's going to happen? It's going to get pushed again. It's been postponed until 2024. So our general conference that was supposed to solve this problem for us in 2020 has now been pushed twice to 2024. All right. Why does that matter? Well, because there were plans. Next slide should say major plans being discussed, Liz. Nope, that's not it yet either. There we go. There, in that general conference, there are supposed to be major plans for us to discuss what we want to do as a denomination and how we move forward. It's become very obvious to most leaders in the United Methodist Church that there is a schism here and that the only way forward is to split, to divide. Some of those plans that will be discussed would include something called the Indianapolis Plan, a New Expressions Worldwide, presented by the UM which is the progressive wing, and then the Next Generation, which is UMC Next, which is more the in-the-middle plan. At that point, a group called the WCA was going to continue to hold to the traditional plan that was passed and presented at the 2019 Special Called Conference. In that time, a new group, next slide, Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation, came together. This was mediated by that gentleman, the bald gentleman there with the mic in his hand. That's Kenneth Feinberg. He mediated the September 11th Victims Compensation Fund. And he worked with the church leaders, several church leaders and bishops to say, hey, how do we do this better? And I will tell you that he came out of that going, you guys are really in a mess. Really in a mess. And some of that mess, as representatives, and he's a Jewish person, he said some of that is really giving you all a bad example. Y'all can't even come together. The best thing for you is to separate through grace and find a way to move forward on that. And so they presented this protocol of reconciliation and grace. And next slide, the United Methodist Church and its members aspire to multiply the Methodist mission in the world by restructuring the church through respectful and dignified separation. So all those other plans were put to the side so that this protocol could go forward. That was what we were hoping to vote for in 2022 and go beyond. But it's not going to happen. It's going to be pushed at least till 2024. If the protocol were to have passed, and if we go to 2024 and this comes back to the church, this is what would be in front of us. What this means for our local church. Next slide, please. Nope, sorry, it should say, what would this mean for your church, Liz? I really tried to clean it up. Those are people who help with the protocol. What would this mean for your church? Congregations may choose to vote to align with a different denomination than their annual conference does. A church council that decides to call for a vote must make that request to the district superintendent, who would be required to call a meeting within 60 days. Local churches will have a deadline to choose where they will land. So if the protocol were to pass, the first thing that would happen is it would go to the annual conference. It would go to the Kentucky Annual Conference, and the conference itself would vote on whether they were going to go to the traditional wing, they were going to stay with post-separation United Methodist Church, or they were going to go to a progressive wing. That's what they would do. The annual conference would make that vote, and then that would come down to the local church. Let's just say for giggles, the annual conference decides to go with the progressive wing. And it comes down, and there are people here that says, we're not going to go that way. That's not who we are. Then this church would have to put in writing through our SPRC chair to the district superintendent that we need to vote at the local church to determine what we're going to do. Personally, this is the things that keep me up at night. This is the stuff that scares me to death. But that's where the protocol would invite us to go. The ultimate goal is nobody has to be forced to be where they don't want to be, where they can't be, where they can't theologically align with those around them. The local church and the protocol, I think it's the next slide, I hope. A local church that affiliates with a Methodist denomination, you will retain your assets and liabilities. An annual conference to which the local church belongs to at that time of the separation will not exercise its trust clause. I'm going to get to the trust clause in a second. Local churches which opt to disaffiliate and not become a part of a Methodist denomination must comply with one of the paragraphs in the Book of Discipline. Now, what does all of that mean? As a United Methodist chartered church, we do not own our property. We don't own this facility or this land or anything. It is held in trust by Southern Hills and is owned by the conference, by the United Methodist Church. That means if we all tomorrow got really upset with the Methodist Church and voted to disaffiliate, we have to come up with a plan to do what we're going to do with our buildings because we don't own it. We could storm out tomorrow and we would have to leave everything that you see right here. This is called the trust clause. And the trust clause was originally set up to protect churches in case there was a closure on how to take those resources and to continue a ministry and maybe starting something new somewhere else. Instead, what it has become some form of a tax that keeps churches from being able to make their decisions. For instance, if we were to leave tomorrow, we would have to pay the rest of this year's apportionments, which is about 10% of our budget, our income. 10% of that income we pay to the annual conference, 1% additional that goes to the district. We would pay the rest of this year, and we would pay an entire another annual conference year to pay for our disaffiliation. That's just the disaffiliation. It doesn't include the buildings. Following with me? For Southern Hills, that's over $100,000. And we pay in our mission together or our apportionments a year. So if we choose to disaffiliate, the first thing that's going to come out the door is a check request for $100,000 plus. And then we have to negotiate with the annual conference how we would buy the building back from the conference. Right? The trust clause has become one of those things that's keeping a lot of folks pretty stickied in all of this. And the trust clause is why some people will regularly, I'm going to get to the questions in a minute that have come up in light of all of this. But in the meantime of all of this, bishops have been asked to just hold off on holding any kind of courts or trials against people who differ from our discipline. Just put a pause in it, which is why Bishop Elavito is in the Western jurisdiction and nobody is doing anything about it. Liz, can you go to the questions I hear page or slide? All right, here's what I hear pretty regularly. If it keeps passing, that is the traditional plan, why don't folks just leave if they disagree? Why not? If it continues to be 60, 70%, 60, somewhere in that window, and it has been that way for 50 years, why don't the progressives just leave the church? Trust clause. Part of it is trust clause. And then the second question is this really all just about sexuality? And the answer to that is no, it's not. It's just the thing that's up front. Next slide. Some of the issues that get into the middle of this is our discipline and, again, particularly that trust clause. As I mentioned, each congregation's property is held in trust. This is part of paragraph 2501 in the Book of Discipline. Our property cannot be sold, bought, or substantially changed without the involvement of the district superintendent and the district site committee. All right? Now, we've gotten away with a couple of things here. Do you know that right out here there used to be a house, and now it's a parking lot? We kind of did that and didn't tell anybody. We couldn't do that now. The rules would, our hands would be slapped big. The trust clause is and isn't, Liz, slide. It is about being a part of the connection. Again, as I said, it's originally a way to support local church. It's not a tax or a restriction, but it has become a leveraging tool for control. And so when people say, why don't they just leave? It's because if they leave, they lose a lot of assets. And no one wants to lose what you have invested in, right? Would anybody want Southern Hills to be taken from us, the facilities? No. There's 60 plus years of history here. We wouldn't want that. So nobody wants to just go, okay, well, I'm going to get out because of this. Well, there's also pension involved, pension for clergy. There's also health insurance that is involved. There's massive amounts of resources that the United Methodist Church has garnered over the years that are part of various options and ministries that we do globally. You know, who deals with UMCOR when something like that happens? On a local level, on a situation like that, how does the United Methodist Children's Home get funding if a church disaffiliates or goes away or whatever? All of these are part of that. And so to answer the question of why don't they leave, the first question is who is they? At this point, if you were looking at the numbers, the question might be look to the progressives. If they keep winning, why don't they just leave? Well, progressives have decided to stay and fight for the change that they desire internally. Many of them have made that. No, we have lost many progressive churches who have left the United Methodist Church because they're tired of the fight. If you're a traditionalist or an Orthodox theologian in all this, until recently you've chosen to stay due to the vote. No, this is who we are. We're just going to stay and continue to hold through. But that's going away. There's a slide that says a big player in all of this, Liz. It's kind of a graphic, but what you can see in all of this is why people don't leave in all this is because buildings and resources and naming and logo and money are all involved. It would be really easy to say, well, if this is a real issue, why don't we just bail out and leave? Well, if you do, you're leaving a lot. It's going to take a lot of guts for any group, any person to leave a local church when all of that is on the table. Got it? Understand? That's why we haven't seen that. That's why we're still at this kind of, Well, one of the first things with the protocol that they want to pass is a dissolving of the trust clause in and of itself. So that local churches and their assets belong to, guess who? The local churches. Well, that's a step away from the United Methodist connectionalism that we've enjoyed since Wesley first started this thing in the 1700s. But that is one of the first steps that they would want to do in order to move forward. All right, so that's the they, why don't they leave question. The second question is about sexuality. Should be the next slide. Sexuality is certainly a key issue in all of this, obviously, but it's not the only one. There are some of the issues that come through all of this that both sides, progressives and traditionalists, agree on. For instance, the trust clause and the ownership of our facilities. Even Adam Hamilton, who is a centrist, he would say he really hopes that that new sanctuary they build out in Kansas City will stay theirs. They don't want to get rid of that, any more than my tiny little Lancaster church did in Garrett County, which has 200 years of history in it. They don't want to just give that over. Yeah. So trust clause is something everybody, but also authority and accountability and Episcopal leaders are all big parts of this question of separation as well. Again, you saw some of the complaints that bishops aren't holding to the discipline, the things that we covenant to. When Jill and Joan and I were ordained, when Liz took her licensing, we all committed to uphold the book of discipline. And so there's a big push to say, why aren't we upholding the book of discipline? If we all said yes to this, we can disagree with it, find the change, but don't just openly do something that's not what you've agreed to do. So it's more than sex. It's about authority and accountability. We have a lot of ineffective pastors in the United Methodist Church, but we have a really poor system of dealing with that. We have a poor system of dealing with that. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with bishops who are appointed for their whole life? They've retired, but they still have as much a voice as someone like Bishop Fairley, who's on the ground doing all of the stuff. Do you appoint bishops for life? Do you appoint a bishop who might be younger, who can do something for 8-year term, and then he goes back, or she goes back to a local church? That's a question. More than sex. It's also more than about appointments of pastors and their effectiveness. There are people in the annual conference who hate my guts. Do you know why? Because I'm a 44-year-old pastor appointed to Southern Hills, one of the key top 10 churches in the annual conference. They thought they were going to be here, not that punk kid. I'm still a punk kid. But the bishop said Southern Hills needs a different style of leadership right now. We don't need someone who's going to retire in another 5 years. So I'm going to send you, Nichols, good luck. There are people in the annual conference who will not talk to me because of my appointment here, because they thought they were owed it. The theological agreement on a variety of issues, including the literal resurrection and the atonement and miracles and Christology and more, are also things that are a big disagreement in United Methodist circles. If you haven't noticed, I believe in a literal resurrection. The literal resurrection of Jesus. Paul was pretty clear that without the resurrection, we're pretty much pooched. But there are pastors and clergy members who don't believe in that. That's a hard thing to sit at the same table with. And a lot of clergy are struggling with that. Next slide, but wait, there's more. With the delay of 2024, or with the delay to 2024, our Judicial Council has been asked to rule on some of these things that came up in 2019, particularly paragraphs that have to do with disaffiliation. Can an entire annual conference disaffiliate from the current United Methodist Church at its own annual conference? Central conferences, like in Africa and in Eastern Europe, can. If you didn't notice, a couple weeks ago, one of the Central European conferences, I think two of them actually, voted to leave the United Methodist Church over this issue. They are traditionalist in their leadership, and they have voted to disaffiliate. So the question has been brought to the Judicial Council, again, our legal board, can annual conferences do that? Central conferences can annual conferences? We should know this week if the Judicial Council will rule that way. If you want my personal opinion, I don't think they will. Because the path of least resistance is to keep things the way they are until General Conference happens in 2024. If it does pass, annual conferences will be able to put legislation as early as this year in their annual conference to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. Again, it keeps me up at night. Because if that vote happens at this annual conference in June, and if it passes, then immediately we have to make decisions. And I say immediately, there'll be a window in there. It's not like July 1st we'll have to decide. But that will be in play. Okay? In addition to the Judicial Council doing its ruling, there are also new launches that are occurring. All right? Go to the Global Methodist Church slide. All right, so in addition to the Judicial Council, Global Methodist Church, with the delay of the General Conference from this coming year to 2024, a group of traditional leaders, part of the WCA, part of other groups as well, came together and they formed the Global Methodist Church. This is a brand new denomination. And they have said that effective May 1st, they are launching this new denomination. And their hope is that many traditional churches will disaffiliate, will even take the hit financially, and join with something beyond themselves. Will leave the United Methodist Church as it is. The Global Methodist Church has a book of discipline, or at least what's the preparatory one? What's it? Oh, yeah, it's a preview. It's a drafted kind of thing. I'm no legalese guy. But they have a draft of a discipline. They have a draft of how they're going to structure churches and how their bishops are going to work and all this kind of stuff. And so they said, we're tired of waiting. We're going to launch on May 1st. And so it is for them about sexuality, but for them they've been very clear. It's also about accountability. It's about the trust clause. The Global Methodist Church will immediately abolish the trust clause, period. And they will also be working on the core historic doctrines that Wesley set out in 1783, that we would follow those, including things like a literal resurrection, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Now, many of you all probably heard about the Global Methodist Church launch, and that's why we're meeting tonight, because I know that's filled with a lot of anxiety for people. What does that mean for us? Well, next slide. In Kentucky, there is a process that is underway for ongoing conversation. I will say, one of the things I love about living here is we don't have the problems that other annual conferences do. We still may be voting in the annual conference around that 68% traditional, 70% traditional, somewhere in there, that range. But our progressives have stayed in line with our discipline. No one has strayed. No one has jumped outside and gone, well, I don't agree with this, so I'm going to do whatever I want. There hasn't been that discord here. Are there hurt feelings? Heck yeah. I got some very dear friends on both sides of the aisle, and their hurts and their wounds are the same, just from different perspectives. All right? So in Kentucky, we don't have that. The Judicial Council may affect our annual conference, but it may not. Again, this is my commentary. I don't think the Judicial Council is going to change it. I think they're going to keep it exactly the way they are because it's the path of least resistance. If they open disaffiliation, the majority of the southeastern jurisdiction will leave the United Methodist Church right away. And quite frankly, in the United Methodist Church in the United States, that's where the money for the church is. So nobody really wants that. Currently, there is a desire to have another one. What did I write? There is currently a desire to love one another well and to hold course, to hold where we are. That is the biggest desire of the leaders that I talk to across our conference. I know a few people who are ready to jump ship. Some of those right here in our own city. But the majority of Methodists, because we don't have the problems that other annual conferences are having, just want to say, can we just hold on to each other and continue to walk with each other until general conference occurs? Okay? Still with me? Okay. Let me make my last slide plea. We are a church that for 60 plus years have been a big tent. Our building is actually modeled after a tent, the tent of meeting. The open spot in the middle is for that place for the Shekinah glory of God to come down upon us. The big tent means something to us. We have been okay being a purple church. We have red and we have blue here. I don't know the demographics of our church in that way. I could make guesses, but it would be commentary. As your pastor, let me please beg us to keep the main thing the main thing. Let's keep Jesus the center and the focus of all we're doing. Let's keep drawing closer to him no matter what. Let's remember our rules. In the United Methodist Church, our rules are pretty simple. Do no harm. And by that I mean, let's not look at each other and go, man, Christina disagrees with me. I don't like her anymore. I don't want to talk to her ever again. Do no harm. Instead, let's do good in all the ways we can, to all the people we can, and all the many opportunities we have in front of us. Do good, do no harm, and stay in love with Jesus. That's our rules. And third, disagreement is fine. It's even welcome. If you're on one of my teams or you're one of my committees, you know I don't want yes people on my teams. I want people who disagree with me because I'm better at that. A smart pastor once said, more heads around the table make a team smarter. All right? We can disagree, but treating each other with respect as humans is key. As soon as we turn on each other and we go, well, you voted for so-and-so, I don't like you no more, we've left the church and we become part of the problem. So my pastoral plea to us is can we hold on? I don't know what jurisdictional is going to do. I don't know what our annual conference is going to do. When I know those pieces of information, I promise I will share them. That's my promise to you. My promise to you is whether we agree or we disagree on any of this, I'm going to love you anyway. Even Terry. Oh, yeah. I'm going to continue to pastor you the best I can. My job is not to tell you how to think or how to be or how to feel. My job is to help you follow Jesus. And so I'm going to continue to walk with you in Jesus. If we get to the point where we come to a place where Southern Hills goes one direction and Pastor Jim needs to go in another direction, that will be a sad day for me. But we'll get to that together. And you will, regardless, be in my love, in my heart. That is basically the history and how we've gotten here. Joyce is begging with one question. If I open the floodgates, is everybody else going to behave? Okay.
You've given us a lot of information. Will this slideshow be available for us to look at?
Yeah, I'll try and clean it up and put it out there so you can have all the slides that you don't want to, but I can put this information out, yeah. And I think we recorded this, right? So we have recorded this. So if you just want to get some popcorn and watch it all over again, you'll be able to do so. This is a touchy, difficult, hard conversation. Whether you're a traditionalist or a progressive, whether you're left or right, whether you voted for Trump or you voted for Biden. I want to invite us to think about one thing. Pastor and theologian Len Sweet has challenged pastors that he is training at his seminary, and I think it's a good challenge for us in the local church as well. It's time for us to go after Jesus and to be more church than the American church. We've got some things that we've learned from our politics in our country that we could very much do to forget, to follow Jesus. And so I want to invite us to lean into him and to lean into each other even when we disagree. We will have small group opportunities to talk about this in the future. May not be right away, but we will have those opportunities, and we will facilitate as best we can those conversations and those ways in which we can be brothers and sisters and find a way forward together at Southern Hills. Cool? Jill, would you come and pray for us as your last act at administrative board?
I just want to thank Jim for elucidating all this information. It takes a lot to process that, and I respect you very much for standing up here and doing that. So thank you on behalf of everybody here whose mind is reeling right now. It's a lot of information, but I amen Jim's plea to hang in there and watch how things play out and not jump to any rash conclusions. You didn't ask me for any commentary, but you got it anyway. So I got the mic, it's my last meeting. What are you gonna do, fire me, right? Yeah. Let's pray together. Loving God, thank you so much for these beautiful people, for this beautiful church, for these leaders. Thank you, Holy Spirit, for being here with us tonight. Thank you for the ministry in Christ that we have together. Thank you for the future. Now, Lord, we thank you for the night ahead and the rest in store for us, and we pray that you give us safe trips home and good night's rest, and help us to come back and worship you with full hearts on Sunday. That's my prayer, and I give it in the name of my risen Christ. And all God's people said, amen.
Thanks, friends. Grace and peace. If you want to talk, I'll stand up here for a minute. Good night.